This event is underwritten in part by Holy Trinity. We deeply appreciate the contributions of our co-sponsor, the Akron chapter of the American Guild of Organists. Please feel free to make use of the chat function to share your comments and questions this morning. Today's featured artist, Marek Kudlicki, was born in Poland and began his musical career while still a student by giving concerts and recitals in many cities of Poland. His teachers include such notables as Flor Peters and Hans Hasselbach. Mr. Kudlicki is the first prize winner and recipient of the special prize of the Polish Ministry of Culture and Art in the organ competition in Poland. His concert career spans almost all of the European countries, North America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, Hong Kong, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Taiwan. He often appears at international festivals as performer and judge for organ competitions. Marek was invited to perform on the largest organ of Asia in the International Festival in Seoul, Korea, for the 300th birthday anniversary of J.S. Bach. He's recorded extensively for the state radio stations in over a dozen countries worldwide, including our own National Public Radio, as well as for several TV and record companies. Marek Kudlicki's repertoire is extensive. It encompasses works of all periods, including early, romantic, and contemporary Polish organ music. Apart from solo works, he has in his repertoire numerous and seldom played pieces for organ and orchestra. He has performed these works with several orchestras throughout the world. In his many years in the profession, he has often complemented his appearances as an organ soloist with activities as a conductor. Mr. Kudlicki is one of the few organists who earns his living almost exclusively from appearing in concerts. As disappointed as we are not to enjoy an in-person recital and lecture, we are delighted to present him to you through the airwaves, introducing us to the treasured organs of his native Poland. So, without further ado, I present Marek Kudlicki.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Vienna, Austria. Thank you for your interest in watching and listening to my lecture. This presentation will be very international. A lecture on Polish historic organs will be broadcasted from Vienna, Austria, to the United States of America. I'm going to present to you 35 instruments and many photographs of them, as well as the original sound of 20 of them. I will mention a large number of names of organ builders, cities, villages, which are unknown to you, sometimes also unknown to me. But I'm hoping it will be very interesting for you to watch and listen to my presentation. So, let's go to the first instrument, the Leżajsk, Bernardine Monastery. The bigger organ was built in 1678 to 1682 by Stanisław Studziński. Because of defective execution, it was rebuilt by Jan Głowiński in 1684 to 1693. The organ previously had 2 manuals and 40 stops. It was repaired in 1729 and 1776 and partly changed in 1852 to 54. Alexander Żebrowski rebuilt it in 1903 to 1906, changing voicing and scaling. He exchanged then the track winches for common ones and introduced the Barker lever for the first and third manual. The grade was divided into manual 1 and 2. In 1929, and shortly after the Second World War, Little repairing was done. In 1966 to 68, thorough restoration with changes into the catalog Baroque specifications was done by Robert Holzen. The smaller organs in the two side naves, also a work of Jan Głowinski, from the time of the building of the main organ, underwent successive changes until 1966 to 68. Let's listen to the sixth concerto by Antonio Soler for two organs. I am here playing with my professor Joachim Rubich. We are using here just the two smaller organs of the side naves. Orawka, Church of St. John the Baptist. The early Baroque organ from 1656 was founded by the Emperor Ferdinand III, who died in 1654. Święcamy, Church of St. Anne. The 8-stop positive was repaired in 1723 and moved to a museum in Salon in 1964. Krzeszów, Basilica of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This organ is one of a small group of the most magnificent instruments of the Baroque period, not only in Poland, but throughout Europe. It was built between 1732 and 1736 by the noted Silesian master Michael Engler of Wrocław. It had 50 stops, 3 manuals and pedal, slider chests, mechanical key and stop action. Michael Engler, the younger, 1688-1760, is widely accepted as the most important organ builder in Silesia during the 18th century. He built 4 3-manual organs. Only 2 remain. The only in Krzeszów Abbey, German Grisel, is the least altered. Slight modifications were made in 1874 by Schlag and Söhne. It is a large organ with 54 stops, and a striking singularity has a rear rank which transposes and half-toned down, and several pedal stops tuned to chamber pitch. This exceptional and important Baroque instrument has been newly restored by the Jemlich firm out of Dresden. It was rededicated during a church service held on October 12, 2008. Let's listen to the Prelude in A minor by Johann Sebastian Bach, played by Joachim Rubich. Wrocław University, Oratorium Marianum, Music Hall. This organ, or more correctly, organ positive, was built in 1718 by the Silesian organ master Adam Horatio Kasparini. It had been situated in the south gallery of the Church of St. Elizabeth, but it was partially damaged and had not been in use since the Second World War. It was also lucky to have survived a church fire in 1976. The organ was restored by Richard Jacobi of Kassel, Germany. He finished his work in 1999. Strzegom, Basilica Minor. The case, dating from 1794, is the work of Peter Zaitius and Johann Lieser. The current organ was built by the Sauer Company in 1927, according to specifications designed by Dr. Oskar Walker. The instrument has pneumatic action and cone chests. Olkusz, Church of St. Andrew. The organ in Olkusz, with its case, mechanics, and most of its 1776 pipes still intact from its inception of the 17th century, is the oldest original instrument in Poland. Olkusz was a wealthy city in the 16th and early 17th centuries, vying with nearby Krakow. When the city fathers decided in 1611 to build a new organ, the German master Hans Hummel, then living in Krakow, was chosen to build it. When the work was almost completed, however, a tragedy occurred. Hummel's only son, who helped his father, died after falling from the scaffolding and was buried in the church crypt. Hummel left Olkusz. The organ was finished by the renowned Polish organ builder Jerzy Nitrowski, builder of the organs in the churches of St. Mary in Krakow and Gdańsk. Arnold Schlick, Maria Zart. Bardo Śląskie, Basilica of the Affliction of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The organ in the basilica was built between 1755 and 1759 by Franz Josef Eberhard of Wrocław and rebuilt in 1875 by Gottlieb Schlag of Świdnica. The strikingly unusual case is the work of a local cabinet maker, Harman. The instrument has tracker action. Krakow, parish church of St. Nicholas. Constructed in the 18th century, this organ was rebuilt in the latter half of the 19th century by Tomasz Fał. Restoration was carried out in 1976-77 by the Warsaw organ builder Włodzimierz Truszczyński under the direction of Professor Jan Jarko. The case and the magnificent front remain unaltered. Krakow, Church of the Holy Cross. The church in its present form dates from the first half of the 16th century. It was provided with an organ in the second half of the 17th century. We can assume that restoration works undertaken between 1683 and 1684 also encompasses building an organ. The organ case and the oldest parts of the organ loft correspond in their stylistic features and, fortunately, important information about the original Baroque instrument and the stages of the instrument from the beginning of the 19th century until the present day has been preserved. It was determined through an inspection in 1995 that the organ was in a very bad state. The name of the organ builder could not be found, but fortunately, while voicing the highest pipe in the case, an inscription was discovered which reads, "Last days of February 1704. A thorough restoration and rebuilding was undertaken undertaken, and the organ is presently an authentic reconstruction of the former instrument. It has 18 stops, 630 pipes, 2 manuals, pedal and tracker action. After years of silence, the organ of the Church of the Holy Cross has regained its rightful place as a jewel in the crown of historic Krakow. The organ was dedicated in September of 2003 by the renowned American organ virtuoso James David Christie. He's playing some pieces from a tablature. Again, Krakow, Church of St. Florian. The organ dates from the 18th century. The Biernacki Company later provided it with electric action, and when the electric mechanism failed, the instrument underwent general repair by the workshop of Jacek Siedlar of Modlnica near Krakow, who restored the case and reinstalled tracker action. The work was completed in 1998. The organ is tuned to historical pitch. Excuse me, just a moment. Krakow, Church of St. Catherine. This is a 7-stop positive from the 18th century with a pneumatic action and pedal, added probably in 1902 at the restoration made by Kasprowicz. Once more, Krakow, Church of St. Anne. First instrument was built at the beginning of the 17th century. The present instrument is the work of Szymon Sadkowski from 1723 to 1727. The organ was repaired in 1804 and 1900, and by Alexander Żebrowski about 1908. It was restored in 1958 to 1963 by Robert Paulsen. We are listening to Canzona by Rochaczewski's old master. Jelenia Góra, Evangelical Church of the Savior. The organ was built in 1927 by Gustav Heinze of Sorau as Opus 150. It has 46 stops, pneumatic action and cone chests. Jędrzejów Cistercian Monastery. This unique organ combines elements of late Baroque style and Rococo. It is a masterpiece of Polish organ craftsmanship and was built between 1745 and 1754 by the organ master Józef Sitarski. The instrument has 4 manuals and pedal, 42 stops, tracker action, and slider chests. The entire wooden mechanics remain unchanged and are preserved in their original form. The 4th manual is located below the lowest keyboard and can be deployed to enable a whole tone transposition higher, a very unusual solution. Also unique within Europe are the stop knobs, which are forged in bronze. Sandomierz, Cathedral Church of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. In 1519, building of a 19-stop organ with positive and pedal was commenced by Stanisław Warpawski of Krakow and Piotr of Miechów. The organ was founded in 1682 by the canon Sebastian Kupiński and built in 1694 to 97 by the master of organ building Andrzej of Gdańsk. It was finished in 1698 by Mateusz Brandt of Torrent and restored in 1751. Wąchocka Cistercian Monastery. The architectonically double sectional organ case with a separated positive was built in the 17th century. It was painted grey and with 3 towers. The decorations is covered in the shapes of ears, curtains, and pinnacles. A sculpture of Virgin Mary is located on the central tower of the organ positive and rolling star, symbol stern, below it. The organ console is embedded into the bottom part of the case. It has 2 manuals and pedal. This instrument, built at the end of the 17th century, includes some elements from the 16th century, about 1580. It was restored in the 19th and 20th century and has tracker action as well as slider chests. Kazimierz Dolny, Church of St. John the Baptist. The organ built in 1607 to 1620 with Dutch features of a late Renaissance case may be a work of a Gdańsk factory. Szymon Lilius certainly was involved in the building and conservation of the instrument. The organ was seriously damaged by the Swedes in 1656. It was restored in 1781, 1832, and 1883. Between 1977 and 1982, it underwent restoration by a craftsman of the Krakow Division of the State Department in charge of the preservation of historical monuments, under the supervision of the priest Dr. Jan Chwałek. No alterations were carried out. The work consisted of doing all necessary repairs, including a few slight modifications to improve the intonation of some of the pipe work. You were listening to Fantasia Tercitoni from the Gdańsk tablature, about 1591. And now Klimontów, Church of St. Joseph, the positive from the first half of the 17th century. Warsaw, Academic Church of St. Anne. The organ in the Church of St. Anne in Warsaw was first mentioned in 1518. This organ, destroyed by fire in 1657, was restored by the King Jan Sobieski Foundation and then reconstructed from 1701 to 1707 by the organ master monk Antoni of Głogów and brother Clemens. A further reconstruction was undertaken from 1845 until 1851 by Mateusz Mielczarski, organ master in Warsaw. The organ was rebuilt yet again in 1900 by the Warsaw Organ Company owned by Karon and Albert Spiegel. In 1946, the ceiling in the church collapsed, seriously damaging the organ. The repairs undertaken by the Biernacki Company between 1945 to 1950 unfortunately resulted in a radical change in the organ's acoustics. In 1983, Vienna celebrated the 300th anniversary of the liberation of Vienna from the Turkish siege by the Polish King Jan Sobieski. To mark the anniversary, Austria offered to rebuild the organ in the Church of St. Anne. The work was carried out by Martin Pflüger of Feldkirch, Austria. Domanivice, Chapel of the Nativity of Mary. The organ in its present form was built in 1795. The instrument has a complex in the shape of a crowned eagle with stretched wings and is unique in the world. Parish documents indicate that there was already a 7-stop organ in the church in 1759. Its present acoustic properties are in keeping with this historical instrument, and the limited specifications make it ideal for performing ancient music. The organ was renovated in 1994 by the Zich Company. Coronovo, Church of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The case and the instrument descend from the 17th century. The organ was rebuilt by Paul Völkner in 1914. Torun, Cathedral Basilica of St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. The first organ installed in the church dated from 1497 and was the work of Master Bartholomew, probably a member of the Franciscan monastery. The organ, which is the subject of our lecture, was built in 1688 by an unknown organ builder. It is one of 2 such objects located in the church. Our organ has 9 stops in the manual, 6 in the pedal, tracker action, and slider chests. Considerable renovation was undertaken on this organ in 1737. In the years following, unknown organ builders made changes, resulting ultimately in an organ that was more suited to the demands of Romantic music. It survived in this form until the end of the Second World War. Mr. Marian Dorava made every effort to reconstruct the ruined instrument in accordance with the original specifications, and finishing touches were made by Josef Molin. The work, accomplished between 1981 and 1983, was sponsored exclusively by parishioners and tourists visiting the historic cathedral. The newly reconstructed organ, mute for 38 years, once again resounded on December 4th, 1983, and was dedicated 10 days later on December 14th with a concert to mark the crowning achievement of re-establishing this pearl of the cathedral. We were listening to anonym pieces from the Lüneburg tablature and another church in Torun, Church of St. Jacob. The first organ was built in 1342 to 1343. The next information about it comes from 1565, when a second separate instrument was built. Both of them survived until 1610. After removing the instrument mentioned, Hans Helbig built in 1610 in the main nave an organ of 2 manuals and 23 stops. In 1892, Emil Sauer changed the action into mechanical cone, adding 1 stop. And between the First and Second World War, the Bransky firm from Bydgoszcz into pneumatic system. They added 1 feather stop and left the previous late Renaissance case with original pipes. The present organ has 28 stops. Włocławek, Cathedral Basilica of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The organ in the Cathedral Basilica was built in 1893 by Jan Spiegel, an organ master from Richtel in Silesia. Konstanty Wojciechowski of Warsaw designed the neo-Gothic facade. A general restoration and reconstruction of the organ was begun in 1987 and completed in 1989. The work was done by the Molin Company of Odrów near Chojnice under the supervision of conservator Marian Durał. Chełmno, Monastery Church of St. John. This organ, installed in a historic case by the company Schlag and Sinne as Opus 563, has pneumatic action. Przeczno, near Torun, Church of the Exaltation of the Cross. This is a historic 9-stop positive from the 18th century. It has tracker action. Let's listen to Toccata in A by Svellik. Lund, Cistercian Abbey. The main church nave is acoustically ideal for this 20-stop instrument built by the Cistercian brother Joseph Kögler. This organ was first introduced to its public on Christmas in 1734. It enchants the senses with its sound and with the beauty of its sculpture and carved decorations. The Kögler organ has undergone several restorations and enhancements. The Prussians almost completely destroyed the instrument by stealing the pipes, but fortunately the original case remained. It was finally restored to its former Baroque glory by means of a general renovation completed in 2002. Zamarte, near Chojnice, Church of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This organ was built in 1774 by an unknown organ master from Kamień-Krajeński. It has a short octave in the pedal. This is an original historic Baroque instrument. Let's listen to a ritual car by Froberg. Fromborg, Cathedral Church of the Ascension. In 1506, a contract was signed with Jan of Chojnice concerning the restoration of the old organ robbed later by the Swedes in 1633. The present organ was built in 1683 to 1685 by Daniel Nitrawski. It was restored in 1702, 1804, 1830, and 1855. In 1935, Emil Kempa of Lübeck installed electro-pneumatic action. The organ was devastated in 1945 and repaired and changed many times after the Second World War. The small organ in the Polish chapel from the same time was restored and connected with the big organ in 1935. Kamień Pomorski, Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The cathedral organ was founded in 1669 by the Pomeranian Duke Ernest Boguslav the Cry, the last bishop of Kamień Pomorski. It was designed by Frederick Breyer, who, for unknown reasons, did not finish the job. Construction of the instrument was completed in December of 1672 by Michael Bergil from Stettin. It had 40 stops, including 10 reeds, 3 manuals, and track action. The organ was repeatedly renovated and rebuilt over the years. Existing sources list works undertaken on the organ in 1726, 1787, 1828, 1830, and 1888. The organ was enlarged and the original action replaced by pneumatic action. The instrument was severely damaged during the Second World War, but was restored to its original quality by the Kamiński Company in 1962. It now has 43 stops and 3,300 pipes and is considered one of the most valuable organs in Poland. The excellent acoustics of the Gothic church enhance the transparent, clear sound. Buxtehude, Choralfantasie, wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern. Krusz Gdański, Church of the Exaltation of the Cross. This instrument was built in 1728 by Andras Hildebrand. Reconstruction, repairs, and conservation were undertaken in 1973 and 1999 by the Molin Company. The first manual has tracker key and stop action. The second manual was added later and has pneumatic action. Let's listen Fantasia Primitoni from the Gdańsk tablature. Thank you for your patience. We have just three more instruments in Gdańsk. The Dominican Church of St. Nicholas. The work carried out here was the reconstruction of the imposing and massive front, which represents the glorification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The original specification of 1755 consisted simply of one manual with 13 stops and a pedal organ of 11. In 1788, second manual with 12 stops was added. Restoration and reconstruction was undertaken in 1977 by the organ builder Emil Hammer of Hanover and Włodzimierz Truszczyński of Warsaw, under the supervision of the master organ builder Franz Rich and Professor Jan Jargon. The working mechanism was overhauled and the original stops were retained, including cymbal stairs and kettle drums. Let's listen to fragments from Bach Hellbells, Aria Sexta. Gdańsk, Basilica of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The long tradition of organs in the Basilica of St. Mary was brutally interrupted in 1945. The earlier instruments in the main and side naves burned completely, and it took 40 years before an organ was once again installed in this famous cathedral through a joint Polish-German efforts. The present instrument combines the housing of an early Baroque organ from the Church of St. John with new works constructed by the Hildebrand brothers of Hanover. The organ in the Church of St. John was built between 1625 and 1629 by Merten Friesen. It was enlarged and enhanced in the 18th century with the addition of base towers and a late Baroque decoration. This beautiful organ case and a fragment of the instrument itself fortunately survived the war, as it was disassembled and hidden in a suburb of Gdańsk in 1943 and 44. This is the case that was used for the new organ in St. Mary's Basilica. The Hildebrand Company undertook to reproduce its acoustics of the historic organ in St. Mary's as closely as possible. Some of the original pipes from the main case and positive had been preserved, which helped them in their efforts. Let's listen to a piece called Salve Regina by Jakub Sowa, Old Master. As you remarked, the church had about 10 seconds reverberation, between 10 and 12. It's a huge church, that basilica. And the last one, Gdańsk Oliva. Oliva is a district of Gdańsk. Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity and St. Bernard. In the 16th century, there were two instruments damaged in 1577. The positive from about 1580 was taken to Sweden in 1674 by the General Carl Gustav Wrangel. It was placed in Stockloster near Stockholm. The next bigger organ from 1603 was built by Christian Heyman. The present smaller organ in the right nave, simply a work of Jan Wolf, was connected with the big organ in 1938. The big organ built by Jan Wolf from Ornetta in 1791-1793 was repaired about 1831 and 1840. It was restored in 1863, and in 1934-35, Jan Goebel installed electro-pneumatic action. The organ was restored in 1955 by the Polish companies Biernacki and Kamiński. And now a symphonic piece transcribed for the organ, Edward Elgar, March, Pomp and Circumstance. it was the last example of my lecture. I'm sure you have memorized all the names of organ builders, etc. And I thank you very much for your patience and perseverance. It was a long lecture, but I'm convinced you liked it.
Marek, thank you for this wonderful organ tour through Poland. We have some great questions for you to address from the chat, so let's get right to them. You've played organs all over the world. Are there any features unique to the organs of Poland, aside from the obvious ornate cases whose carvings and gildings are just breathtaking?
Yes, Andrew printed for me your questions.
Oh, terrific.
Yes. No. Yes, I have traveled over the world. You asked for features or difference between Polish organs and organs in other countries and continents. Well, it's a very complex question and very difficult. It depends. Do you mean old historic organs, or do you mean organs built in the present century or the last years?
I think either one, whichever you'd like to address, or both.
Yes, I wouldn't look for differences because if you travel to Germany or the Netherlands, you could also find historic instruments like those I presented in Poland. And there are also many now working companies building excellent instruments. I traveled to the United States for the first time 40 years ago, and I must tell you, I see a big difference that so many organs, many fine organs have been built in those years. So my first visit was 1980, and maybe I played on not very good organs, but nowadays some companies build organs in Baroque styles, like Taylor and Woody or Carl Wilhelm from Canada. So there is perhaps nothing unique in the Polish organs. So I could write a book about it. It's very, very difficult story, very complex question.
So the second, what part or parts of the traditions of performing Polish music are the hardest traditions to hold on to help keep them from disappearing?
Yes, it was maybe 30, 40 years ago. It was, to describe, it was really dangerous to lose those traditions because, Poland was one of the communist countries, although it had nothing to do with Polish rich history. But nowadays there are so many musicologists working on finding old copies, old tablatures. So I think it's not so dangerous. We are not afraid that music can disappear. So there are still new editors, new publishers. I mentioned some pieces that we were listening to from different tablatures. So there are really, nowadays you can find everything in internet, or at least order the music. So that's all I could tell you about it.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Are there any publications or online references about these organs? The Orquist organ sounds like it's tuned to a lower reference pitch and maybe in an interesting temperament.
This organ in Orquist sounds one tone higher. If you press C major, you hear a D major. It's tuned one tone higher. It's called, the Germans called it, I forgot it, but it was a German word. It was a purpose to tune the organs higher because the sound was better, was brighter. And publications referenced about these organs. I can offer you my CD. I record in English. I can bring to the United States. Of course, I come again after 3 years, because as yet I have been 56 times to the United States, but because of the pandemic, I haven't been there for almost 3 years. So you can order my CD if you wish. It's a good example. I first recorded it for the Polish radio, and then a record company issued it as a CD because it was very interesting document.
So people could perhaps contact you through your website to get information? Okay. Yeah. And you can find that address on our website, artsholytrinity.org. I'll put that in the chat.
You may look at the website of the record company, just Dux, D-U-X. If you may be able to find something and to find a method how to buy it. If not, please contact me on my website, on my address, and I have some CDs, some samples at home.
Oh, super, thank you. So many of these instruments have had long lives. How challenging is it to keep them maintained in this current climate of support for the organ in Poland?
Yes, everything depends on money, and nothing has changed. I must tell you that there are Polish organizations. First of all, Ministry of Culture has a budget for restoring instruments. Some financial means come from private sources. Of course, it's not easy to restore an instrument from 17th or 16th century. Not every organ builder can do it. So sometimes it's necessary to invite or engage specialists, for example, from the Netherlands. They have a long-year tradition of restoring organs. But as mentioned in my lecture, in several examples, we also have such specialists. And we are proud that so many old or ancient organs have been restored and kept in very good conditions. So we can play, concertize on them, presenting, of course, ancient and old music.
So are current organ builders not only maintaining, but are they thriving in building new instruments in Poland?
Yes. If you read the newspapers, etc., you always encounter new names of organ builders. There are still more than it was 30, 40 years ago. Of course, those companies have survived, but there are still new. Recently, I read about, and I met those organ builder personally. This organ builder was chosen to build an organ in Panama recently, in the cathedral, South America. Why in Poland? There are so many organ builders around the world. So we can say there is the current organ builders or organ building thriving in Poland. It's very nice expression, very nice word.
So we noticed that the older organs have a distinctly different sound. What accounts for that?
It's the same in each country. The older organs sound different because they were built, other material were used, different wood, etc. But there is something maybe common for all instruments. There is nothing particular that the Polish old organs sound different, but I have played on Silbermann organs built when Bach was alive, so I can compare those organs. But this organ in Olkusz we are talking about was built 1620. Bach was not born yet. It's so significant, you know. But it's difficult to tell why old organs sound different. Of course, romantic organs sound different, and it's a development of organ building. I would explain it this way.
Sure. So the materials, the metal, the wood, the wind supply, the voicing, the acoustic, all of those things go into the differences that make one distinctive.
Yes.
So who or what inspired you to study organ? And did any of these particular instruments that you showed us influence your decision to pursue that study?
Yes, I began to learn music when I was 5.5. My father was a lawyer. He was a music lover, and he sent me to a lady who taught piano, and I started when I was 5, almost 6 years old. Then I went to music school when I was 7, 8. And at the age of 14, some people said, because I wanted to become a pianist, like every child probably. And some people told me, my father too, please try the organ, because organ has probably more possibilities. Nobody thought about the career, but of course, when I was 14, I started learning organ at music gymnasium or lyceum. It was Polish system. It was a middle school, like college. And my first year was difficult because I was not convinced. And I didn't practice enough, etc. But then when I was 15, something suddenly changed, and I suddenly fell in love with organ. 1 year later, I began to study conducting. So then when I became a student the music academy in Krakow, I studied organ and conducting. So this is my story.
A curious question from Christina. If the organs were built to fit the architectural space of these churches and cathedrals, or perhaps some of the churches were specifically constructed to acoustically complement the organs that were already planned for the space?
I think the churches were built first, and then the organ builders tried to match the instrument a church. So I think there are many small churches having small organs. There are huge cathedrals having big instruments. So I think the churches, of course, were built first, and then the organ builders tried to fit the architectural space. That's true. It was a very fine question.
And they've done an amazing job with that. Some of those, just like you say, feel like they're coming out of the walls, and the decoration just so greatly enhances the.
Yes, I would like to compare perhaps churches in America and in Europe. There are so many old churches, and therefore there are so many old organs. And in America, there are nowadays so many very good instruments, but in my opinion, carpeting is the best muffler of the instruments, because it's very comfortable to sit, to have legs, etc. But you can build the best instrument, which can be the acoustics can be killed by carpetings. But sorry, it's not very critical. But I have played the cathedral, St. Paul's Cathedral in Pennsylvania, a large city. I forgot Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The acoustics are marvelous. Or Grace Cathedral in San Francisco.
Sure. 50% of the organ sound is the acoustic, yeah, at least, right? Yeah.
Yes, some really halls at universities have sometimes better acoustics than churches, because there is wood, nothing more. And it brings a good reverberation.
Yeah, it's important. Robert said he would like to see a wide variety of vocabulary describing these marvelous differences in the basic sound. Tell me where to inquire.
Well, it's a very difficult question.
Well, we didn't want to give you any softballs.
You should ask an acoustician, people having to do or exploring the acoustics. So I think I asked it, I replied, I answered this question in my previous answers. So maybe you.
So are there particular texts that might refer to organ and acoustic sounds that could help him expand his vocabulary on that? Tough question. The Organ Handbook by Klotz, would that be one you might recommend? Let's see. Looking on my shelf. Structure, Design, Maintenance, History, and Function of the Organ. Are you familiar with that book? Organ Handbook by Hans Klotz. The Concordia Publishing House. That would be helpful. Any other questions or comments in the chat before we close for the day?
Thank you very much.
We're so grateful to you, Marek, for this informative and engaging lecture. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. We're grateful also to your technical assistant, Andrew Kempa, for his important part in this presentation as well. Yes. A recording of this lecture will be available on our website, artsholytrinity.org. That's artsholytrinity.org early next week. So please feel free to share it and watch again. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.